Some of these stories take place in Midgard. Some of these stories take place in other realms. And this story travels through a few of them. But it's mostly about the Aesir in Asgard, or as you may know them, of the Norse gods, and of one of them in particular. One who is fond to many, Loki. Now Loki is curious. Loki was not born a child of Odin like, say Thor was. But, what's thunder without lightning? What's Thor without Loki? And Loki is ingenious and bursts of inspiration. But perhaps, people like that are better to be friends with on occasions and not to have around all the time. And this story is about a time when Loki had been, absent, as was his wont. Off exploring, people thought, finding out new things to do, working out new mischief to get up to, maybe. Now, Loki had a wife called Sigyn, Victory's friend, and she was beautiful and fair and fine and, most of the time, as far as we know, happy to stay in Asgard. Loki's wanderings, however, had taken him further afield, and maybe he was exploring the Jotun part of his blood, the giant parts. Maybe he was wandering through Jotunheim, the land of the giants. Maybe he'd gone to Utgard, the place beyond the garden where great primal forces live. Maybe he'd wandered through the realm of the dwarves. But word reached Asgard that wherever he'd been spending a lot of time with Angerbode. Now, she was a giantess. And, after spending a lot of time with her, one thing obviously had led to another, because the rumour came to Asgard of Loki having 3 children with Angerbode. And Odin, seeing with his mind's eye that he'd given up one of his good eyes to be able to look better with, knew that this news was tied up with the fate of the world and that they needed to explore and they needed to find out the details. And, maybe he just was curious too, because, half-brother with Loki, he had a couple of desires that it would maybe be best not to fulfill or talk about in a family storytelling session. So they sent off messengers and they found Loki's children and they brought them back to Asgard. One of them walking tall and proud. Another carried on a long, long pole that had to be replaced with another longer pole halfway through the journey. And the third running around and causing havoc and panting. Which might give you a clue as to which of the children that was. Arriving in Asgard, you can imagine all the gods called into council and into a thing where they would look at Loki's children and decide whether they could be admitted into Asgard and into the Aesir like Loki had, or whether something else needed to be done. And Odin, watching, saw the first stand forward. She was tall, she was proud, she was giantess. There is a debate about exactly how she looked, but being a giantess, I suspect she looked exactly as she wanted, and her look was terrifying. Her gaze, when it landed on you, would make your blood run cold. And your gaze, should it be brought back and caught by her, would perhaps see a beautiful woman, fine of form, slender of figure, ice clear eyes gazing into your soul. But then, perhaps you would see a corpse standing with rotten flesh as well, and maybe one side of her was living and the other side was dead, or maybe she was beautiful from the waist up and dead from the waist down. Who knows? All that was known is all who gazed on her saw their doom and saw terror. And Odin, being a little prepared for this sort of thing, having gone through some very interesting experiences before, decided just the place where she might like to live. Her name was Hela, and a region of Niflheim, the land of darkness, became known as Helheim, and she took up residence there. And all those who died, who didn't die in battle, but died in the sea and were scooped up by Ran's nets, or who died at home in bed, or of the plague, or things like that, they were sent to Helheim. And there she set up her kingdom, and once someone entered it, they never left. But that was just the first of Loki's children. The second of Loki's children had grown even while sitting there and while the gods talked. This had started out as a worm, and then become a serpent, and then a great snake, and now a dragon. It was a great, great long string of a beast, with great sharp pointy teeth and poisonous breath. And looking at it, Odin quickly got Thor and whoever else would help to fling the beast into the sea, because, well, getting it as far away from them as possible was the only thing he could think of doing with that. And it sank down, deep, deep down into the depths, and wriggled round the world till it could eat its own tail. And there are none who have been fishing for that worm, except one. And that is a story of Thor, which I might tell later. He wasn't successful, and some people just say that it's the tale of one that got away, kind of emphasised. But that leaves one final child of Loki and Angerboda. And this child, well, was more to the liking of the Aesir, because they loved dogs, they loved hunting, and they had more than a little bit of wolfishness about them. But not as much wolfishness as this child of Loki had. Fenris was a wolf, and a wolf's wolf. Shaggy fur, sharp teeth, fast and fleet. You could throw things and he would fetch. But if he didn't want to, he would tell you, because, well, he could talk with a voice that humans and the Aesir could understand. And, well, at first, this was great fun. They loved playing with Fenris, and Fenris loved showing off, loved competing, loved showing how fast he could run, and how silently he could move when stalking. And, well, if he chased some of Freya's cats, then that was just normal and to be understood. But he was hungry. He was always hungry. And after a while, the Aesir were avoiding feeding time, because he looked at them with eyes that would eat you. And he started to look at all of them as if they were just little snacks to be eaten. And it was only Tyr who would feed him. Only Tyr, the great warrior god, swordsman, who would play with him and talk with him and discuss hunting and tactics and, all that sort of thing. This had been going on for a while though, and Fenris kept growing and kept eating, and his appetite showed no sign of stopping. So the gods decided they should do something about it. And what do you do when you're training a dog? Well, you put a lead on it, don't you? Yeah. But what sort of a lead could you put on a child of Loki? So they went to the forges and they drew iron from the earth. Then they drew carbon and steel and water and wind, and they hammered and they smithed and they forged a great chain they called lead. And this chain was strong, and it looked strong, and it looked big and solid. And they went up to Fenris and said, "Ha, look, we've made a chain. Bet you can't break out of that." Fenris sniffed. He sniffed and he looked at the chain. And he sniffed round the chain, and he eyed up the chain, and he sized it up, and he thought, okay, I can take this challenge. So he let them bind him with the chain, wrapping him round and wrapping the chain through a rock. And then he stretched. And then he flexed. And then he shuggled and he wriggled and he shattered the chain, and chunks of it went flying throughout the 9 realms. Shattered steel sticking in lumps in all the worlds. And Fenris said, "Feed me now, thank you, I'll have some more food." The gods were a little bit upset about this, and they took counsel again, and they thought long and hard, and they brought out all of their special metals, all the bits and pieces they'd been saving just in case they were needed. And Odin thought hard. Maybe he even went to Mimir's well and consulted, how do you smith, like tempering temperatures. Oh right, forge welding, use a bit of sand, that works, okay. And this time they hammered long and hard and laboured well to make this chain the strongest they could make it. They made it strong and slender and supple, and rather than relying on the brute force of the first chain, they allowed a bit of flex and a bit of spring like in a sword blade. And they went back to Fenris and said, "Aha! You shattered that chain so simply, we decided it wasn't a proper test of our smith skill. They must have been having a bad day that day, so we've made another chain for you to try. Here, let us bind you in this one and see if you can break out of it." And Fenris looked, and he sniffed, and he stalked round it, and he looked at the links and the welds and the joins. "Okay," he said, "bind me up, I'll break it." And they bound him up. And Fenris stretched, and he shuggled, and he wriggled, and this chain was strong indeed. So he stretched, and he strained, and he bared his teeth, and he drew all the reserves of strength he could find in his feet, and he shattered the chain, and he went splintering, flying throughout the 9 realms until bits and pieces could be found everywhere. And then he growled a little and said, "Right, I'm hungry. Who's going to feed me?" And Tyr went off to empty the larder again. This time the gods took deep counsel and decided that it was beyond their ken how they could make a chain that they could use to bind Fenris. And the strength and the ferociousness of him, well, that boded ill. And they muttered, and they avoided the place where he lay, and they sent a messenger off. They sent a messenger off to the dwarves. Now the dwarves had delved deep, both to find minerals and also the knowledge of working them. They could make fair things with gems and jewels, but they loved making cunning things even more. And when they heard that there was a challenge to bind Fenris, well, they jumped at the opportunity. And they delved deep into their ken, deep into their resources, and dragged out all the special things that they only used for extra special jobs. They took the sound the cat makes when it walks. They took the roots of mountains. They took the beards of women, and they took the what else did they take? Oh, the breath of fish. All these things they fashioned into a slender silken cord, a chain so fine that it looked like a necklace, so light that you could fit it into a pouch, but long enough still to go around Fenris's growing girth. And taking the chain back, the gods walked over to Fenris and presented him with it. And Fenris, he sniffed a little, and it smelt of magic. And he gazed at it, and it looked just like a little bit of fabric. And then he asked its name, and they called it Gleipnir, this chain. And they said, "Ah, brave Fenris, proud Fenris, strong Fenris. Surely one who can break all the other chains can break this little trifle." And Fenris looked at the chain and looked at the gods, the Aesir, and he growled. "Where," said he, "is the fame I'd get for this thing? It's a small, slender thread. If I'm to break this, I who've broken all your other chains, my fame won't go far. No, I'll not let you bind me in this." "Well, if that's the way of it," said the Aesir, resorting to taunting rather than challenging, "if you're afraid of such a little chain, then, well, fair enough. You'll be a coward and called a coward for the rest of your life." And Fenris growled at this. Being called a coward is never easy. And he said, "Oh, it's not the chain I don't trust. It's you. We're not friends anymore. Friends don't taunt friends. I don't trust you. There's a trick in here. And it's not a trick I can smell or I can lick. And I can't taste it, but I'm not going to be bound by it. Not unless you give me some reason to trust you, some security." And everyone looked around and couldn't work out what to do, until Tyr stepped forward. "I'll put my hand in your mouth. And then, if there's a trick and you're not released after you've been shown, after we've shown that you can't break the chain, then, well, then my hand will be in your mouth for longer than I'd like it to be. So if there's any trick at play, there is a security and a surety. You know me." Said Fenris. "I know you. You're brave. You're not going to snatch your hand away. Okay." And Tyr put his hand, his sword arm, into Fenris' mouth, as Fenris was bound by Gleipnir, the silken chain. And the chain was bound through a rock and anchored with another rock deep, deep into the earth. And Fenris shook. And he shook, and he growled, and the chain didn't budge. And then he shuggled, and he shook, and he stretched, and he drew on all his strength from all of his claws, and still the chain wouldn't budge. And he rolled, and he writhed, and he roared, and his eyes burned like the fire that eats mountains and melts rock. But still he couldn't break the chains. And then, to no surprise, the Aesir looking, they didn't unbind Fenris. No way were they going near that pup. And, well, it all ended happily ever after. Except for Tyr, whose hand still lies in Fenris' mouth. And Tyr left that battle one-handed, a swordsman with only one arm. But he learned to fight with another one. And many stories can be told about things which happened after that. And long were the years where Fenris stretched and strained at his chains and rocked the rock and shook the earth, waiting for the time when he would be loosed, when the bindings would break, just like all promises and vows will come to an end at the twilight of the gods, at Ragnarok, when brother fights brother and all bonds are broken, and Fenris will break free and eat the sun and come searching for Tyr, having eaten an appetizer, longing for the extra part of his snack, and perhaps even eat Odin himself. But those are all other stories which I'll tell later.